Hello students, I hope you are doing good. In our previous class, we have learned about how to write a chemical reaction and how to balance it. In today's class, we will learn about different types of chemical reactions. So there are total 4 types of chemical reactions. Number 1, combination reaction. Number 2, decomposition reaction. Number 3, displacement reaction. And number 4, double displacement reaction. Now let us learn about each one of them one by one. So the first one is combination reaction. A combination reaction can be defined as a chemical reaction in which a single product is formed from 2 or more reactants is known as a combination reaction. So you can understand that when 2 or more reactants they combine together to form a single product, that type of a chemical reaction is known as a combination reaction. The general form of representing a combination reaction is this. So suppose we have 2 reactants A and B. When they undergo a combination reaction, they combine to form AB. So AB is a single product formed by the combination of 2 different products, reactants A and B. Now let us look at the examples of combination reaction. So here I have taken 2 examples. So the first one is when calcium oxide, also known as quicklime, is treated with water, then we get calcium hydroxide. So you can see that 2 reactants are combining together to form a single product, calcium hydroxide, also known as slag lime, along with release of heat. Second one, when carbon reacts with oxygen, we get carbon dioxide, again with release of some heat. So again in this case also, if you see, carbon is reacting with oxygen, so there are 2 reactants and the product we get is only a single product, which is carbon dioxide. So a combination reaction is one in which 2 or more than 2 reactants they participate to form a single product. Now let us proceed to the second type. So the second type of chemical reaction is the decomposition reaction. So now a decomposition reaction is just the opposite of that of a combination reaction. Let us try to define it. A chemical reaction in which a single reactant breaks down to give simpler products is called a decomposition reaction. So in case of a combination reaction, 2 or more reactants were participating or combining to give one single product. In case of decomposition reaction, just the opposite happens, where one single reactant, it breaks down into 2 or more than 2 simpler products. So the general form representing a decomposition reaction is this. So here we have the product AB, which undergoes decomposition reaction and breaks up into 2 products, A and B. If you remember, this is just the opposite of the combination reaction that we have seen just now. Next, come to the examples of decomposition reaction. So I have taken 3 examples here. The first example is when ferrous sulfate, FeSO4, is heated, it breaks up into 3 products: ferric oxide, Fe2O3, sulfur dioxide, SO2, and sulfur trioxide, SO3. These 2 are gases and this is a solid. So basically, by decomposing ferrous sulfate solid by heat, we get 3 products. Out of them, 1 is solid and the rest 2 are gases. Second is electrolysis of water. That means when we pass electricity into water, we get 2 products, that means water breaks up into two products on passage of electricity. They are hydrogen and oxygen. Let us try to understand. Look at the setup. Here a plastic mug has been taken, half filled with water. Two electrodes are dipped into it. One is anode and the other one is cathode. As we already know, anode is the positive electrode and cathode is the negative electrode. These two electrodes are connected to the battery through a switch. When we switch on, electricity starts passing through this circuit. After some time, we observe that bubbles starts coming out of the water at the two electrodes. These bubbles are of oxygen and hydrogen. Oxygen gas gets collected over the anode and the hydrogen gas gets collected over the cathode. Now, since the ratio of hydrogen and oxygen in water is 2:1, as we know from the formula itself, H2O, so the amount of hydrogen gas collected over the cathode is twice to that of the oxygen gas collected over the anode. This process is called electrolysis, and this is a decomposition reaction wherein water decomposes into hydrogen and oxygen. The third example that I have taken to show decomposition reaction is that of silver chloride. Silver chloride in presence of sunlight breaks up into two products, silver metal and chlorine gas. It is seen when silver chloride is kept under sunlight for quite a long period of time, then this white colored silver crystal, they turn grey. So why that happens? This happens due to the formation of silver metal whose color is grey and the release of chlorine gas. So you can see that for a decomposition reaction to take place, we always need some energy to break down the reactants into products. This energy can be in the form of heat, electricity or sunlight, but always some amount of energy in any of these form is required for decomposition reaction to take place, that is for the reactants to break up into the products. Now next let us come to a third type of chemical reaction, which is displacement reaction, or we can also call it a single displacement reaction. So a single displacement reaction or simply displacement reaction can be defined as a chemical reaction in which a more reactive element displaces a less reactive element from its compound is called a displacement reaction. The general form to represent this displacement reaction is this one. So according to the definition, you have known that a displacement reaction is one in which one of the reactant which is more reactive than the other reactant which is less reactive in comparison to that displaces this element from its compound. So here the compound taken is AB and the element taken is C. So if this element C is more reactive to the element A in this compound, then C replaces A and forms CB, and this A is removed. So this is a general form representing a displacement reaction wherein C displaces A from AB and forms CB, releasing A. So example showing a displacement reaction is this one, wherein I have taken iron metal and a copper sulfate solution in water, so an aqueous solution of copper sulfate. So if we add iron metal into an aqueous solution of copper sulfate, then since iron is more reactive than copper, so iron displaces copper from copper sulfate and forms iron sulfate or ferrous sulfate, plus copper metal is released. So this is an example of displacement reaction. Let us try to understand it details. On your screen, in the first picture, in a cylinder, copper sulfate solution in water is taken. So if you see the color of copper sulfate solution is blue, into this solution an iron nail is dipped. If you keep this setup undisturbed for few hours, you will observe that the blue color of the copper sulfate fades into green color. And also the surface of the iron nail, which is dipped into the solution, gets deposited by some metal particles. So why this observation happens? This observation happens because iron from the iron nail dissolves into the copper sulfate solution and displaces copper from the copper sulfate solution and forms ferrous sulfate solution. So the color of ferrous sulfate solution is green. So therefore slowly the color of the solution changes to green, and the metallic copper which gets displaced from the copper sulfate solution gets deposited on the surface of the iron nail, and hence we see some brown color deposition on the surface of the iron nail dipped into the solution. So this is an example of a displacement reaction wherein iron displaces copper from copper sulfate. The fourth type of chemical reaction that we are going to study is that of double displacement reaction. So what is a double displacement reaction? It is more like a displacement reaction. So let us try to first define it. A chemical reaction in which there is an exchange of ions between the reactants is called double displacement reaction. So in the above case, there was only a single displacement. That means one element was displacing one other element from its solution. Okay, but herein there will be two displacements. Let us try to understand that. This general representation of double displacement reaction is this. So here we have two compounds, AB and CD. So these two compounds, they exchange their ions and form AD plus CB. So you can see A has exchanged its position with C and also B has changed its position with D. So there are total two displacements. Let us try to understand this with an example. So here I have taken the example of sodium sulfate and barium chloride. So this example we have studied in the previous class also, if you remember, while learning balancing of chemical reactions. So let us try to understand this. So when sodium sulfate, aqueous solution of sodium sulfate, that means water solution of sodium sulfate, is added to water solution of barium chloride, that means aqueous solution of barium chloride, then we get barium sulfate solid as a precipitate. It is an insoluble in water and aqueous solution of NaCl. So if you see, it is a double displacement reaction. So let us try to understand it in details. In this compound there are two ions, Na plus ion, sodium plus ion, and sulfate, SO2 minus ion. So there are two types of ion present in this compound, and again there are two types of ions present in this compound. So in this compound the ions present is barium 2 plus and Cl minus or chloride ion. So when these two compounds they react, there is an exchange of these ions among themselves. This sodium plus ion displaces barium 2 plus ion. See, the sodium plus ion has displaced barium 2 plus ion, and this sulfate 2 minus ion has displaced Cl2 minus ion. So now the products formed are barium sulfate and sodium chloride. So this is a double displacement reaction where there are two displacement taking place. The cations are also exchanging their position and also the anions are exchanging their position. So now if you take a a close look into this reaction, initially we have taken a water solution of sodium sulfate and a water solution of barium chloride. All the two solutions were colorless water solution. So now when these two water solutions were added to each other, then we get two products. One is barium sulfate, which is solid. So if it is solid, that means it is not soluble in water, it is insoluble in water. So therefore it forms a precipitate, an insoluble residue which settles down at the bottom of the container, and in the liquid there is sodium chloride present. Since sodium chloride is soluble in water, so we get aqueous sodium chloride. This type of a reaction is also known as precipitation reaction. Precipitation reaction. Why? Because a precipitate is formed here. A precipitate is a insoluble residue. A precipitate is known as an insoluble residue. The reaction in which precipitate is formed is known as a precipitation reaction. So in this reaction, by adding two water soluble salts, we get an insoluble salt and a soluble salt. So due to the formation of this insoluble salt, this insoluble residue or precipitate, this reaction is also known as a precipitation reaction. So I hope all the four types of chemical reaction are now clear to you. Now at the beginning of our class, we discussed about combination reaction. Take a close look into their examples. Here in both the examples, if you see, heat is produced as one of the products. Okay, so along with the formation of a product, so in this case calcium oxide reacted with water to form calcium hydroxide. So this is a combination reaction, but along with the formation of this product, there is a heat evolution. So heat is also released in this reaction. Again, in the reaction between carbon and oxygen forming the product carbon dioxide, in this reaction also heat is released. So those reactions in which heat is released along with the formation of product are known as exothermic reactions. Exothermic reactions. So an exothermic reaction is defined as a chemical reaction in which heat is released along with the formation of products are called exothermic reactions. So other than those two examples, here I have taken one more example, which is of respiration. You will learn about respiration in details in biology. So basically I'll give an idea. Respiration is breaking down of glucose or food molecules. We know that carbohydrate molecules, if we go on breaking carbohydrate particles, we end up into glucose. So in respiration process takes place in our cells. So in the cells, the glucose molecule is reacted with oxygen, and as a result of that we get two products. One is carbon dioxide and water, along with evolution of a large amount of heat. So since it produces a large amount of heat, this is known as an exothermic reaction. Now this glucose comes from carbohydrates that we eat through our food. This oxygen comes from our breathing. We take in oxygen while we breathe. So this oxygen is transported to our cells through the blood. So in the cell, this glucose reacts with oxygen, and the products formed are carbon dioxide, which is again transported to the blood and expelled outside while we exhale. And this heat produced is used for doing our activities. So it is basically the energy that we use every day. So since this reaction produces heat, this reaction is an exothermic reaction. So respiration is an exothermic reaction. Again, while discussing decomposition reaction, one of the examples that we took is of ferrous sulfate. So when ferrous sulfate is heated, it breaks down into 3 products. So if you see here, heat is an important factor. So in this reaction, heat has been taken up by this reactant. So those reactions in which heat is absorbed or taken by the reactants is known as an endothermic reaction. An endothermic reaction. So an endothermic reaction can be defined as a chemical reaction in which heat is absorbed to form products is called an endothermic reaction. So here I have taken one more example. So when calcium carbonate, also known as limestone, is heated, we get 2 products, that is, or it breaks up into 2 products, calcium oxide and carbon dioxide. So if you see, this is also a decomposition reaction, since one reactant is decomposing into 2 products. And it is also an endothermic reaction. Why? Because heat is being absorbed in this chemical reaction. So this is a decomposition reaction as well as an endothermic reaction. So endothermic reactions are all those reactions in which heat is absorbed by the reactants in order to form products. So I hope all the 4 types of chemical reactions that we discussed, along with them we have also seen about precipitation reaction, endothermic reactions, exothermic reactions. So I hope all these reactions, chemical reactions, were clear to you. So that's all for today. Thank you and take care.